Welcome to another special edition of Ram Country. For the last several shows, we've been focusing on beginning beekeeping. I'm your host, Dave Willauer, and since 2005, I've had the privilege of being able to share with you some of the great things that are happening all across the Spring-Ford Area School District. In these most recent few shows, I've had the opportunity to share something that my wife and I have been doing since we retired, and that is that we've become beekeepers. We've learned a lot, and we still know very little. There's a lot more that we need to learn. In the first show, we talked a little bit about what is a honeybee, why anybody would want to keep bees, and so on, the life cycle of the honeybee. And then in the last show, we talked about the location, of selecting a proper location for your hive, setting up that hive, getting it ready to receive the actual bees, and we touched on the history of beekeeping just a bit. In this show, we're going to talk about how you actually install bees in a hive. And that is an exciting thing to do, especially the first time that you've done it. We took beginning beekeeping classes over at the 4-H Center in Creamery, and those classes were put on by the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association. That's a great way to get started. Not only do you learn a lot, but you develop a network of people that you can talk about when you have when you have questions and you have concerns. We bought our bees from the Worcester Honey Farm over in Worcester, Pennsylvania. You order them early in the year, January or so, and then usually in April, beginning of April to mid to the end of April, you go and pick them up. There are different pickup times when you go to pick up the bees. You order a package of bees. It costs about $100. It comes with a queen and 3 pounds of bees. Yes, they really are sold by the pound. 3 pounds of bees translates into about 10,000 bees. And I have some video that I'd like to share with you about that trip over to Worcester Honey Farms. There are hundreds of boxes of bees in this video. And if you listen, you can hear the buzz. Just take a listen for a second. And then you pick your bees up. I selected a package of bees with a marked queen. That means that the queen has a little painted dot on its thorax. That's so it's easier to identify, especially for beginning beekeepers like ourselves. The queen, even though it's twice as big as a worker bee, when it's mixed in with tens of thousands of bees, it's very difficult to try to find. The first picture I want to show you is coming home with those bees. I'm carrying 2 packages of bees in this picture. If you look at my left thumb, you can see my thumb is extended away from the cage. That's because the very first time I was stung as a beginning beekeeper was carrying the packages of bees from the trunk of my car to our bee yard. Got stung through the screen, actually. Now, you can't see it in the picture because there's so many bees in there, but if you look at the package that I have here on the desk, you can see there is a silver can on the inside, and that can is filled with sugar water. 1-to-1 sugar water, 1 part water, 1 part sugar, and that's what's used to feed the bees. There's a couple of small holes punched in the bottom, and the sugar water drips out, and the bees nurse off the bottom of that. Attached inside with that can is a queen cage. I have a queen cage in my hand, and the queen is in there with about 3 or 4 attendants with whom she has been raised. The bees that she is shipped with, those 10,000 bees, the queen wasn't raised with those. And in fact, when they're first put together, those worker bees want to kill the queen because she's foreign. So they're shipped together and they begin to get to know each other. In this queen cage, you can see there's a part of sugar, and the attendants or the worker bees that are in that queen cage with the queen use that sugar, convert it into food. They feed the queen and they keep her alive. Meanwhile, her pheromone or her scent is being distributed in that package of bees. And there's a little cork on the end here. I don't know if you can see that or not. The cork is removed in this one, the opening, because that's where the queen gets released. That cork is placed in there to keep the worker bees from getting in and killing the queen, and from the queen getting out and having a premature execution, as it were, by the worker bees with whom she is shipped. So You take this package of bees, and through the screen, you spray it several times with that 1-to-1 sugar water. That helps to calm the bees. It helps to keep them busy because they're busy licking that sugar water off of each other, cleaning each other. And then you take the package of bees to the bee yard. If you look at this next picture, you can see where I have removed the can of sugar water. I've removed the queen cage. There's a little strap that holds that queen cage in place. And I'm in the process of putting a very thin piece of plywood over the opening to keep the bees inside the package crate. And if you look at the next picture, you can see a close-up of the queen. Now, she's not showing the painted mark on her thorax, so let's put a circle around her, and you can see right where the queen is. There are attendants there. There are a couple of other worker bees who are trying to get out. Now, I want to point out the comb that is attached to the queen cage. That is always a good sign when you see that, and this is what it actually looks like. It'll be a medallion of comb like this, and it's two-sided. They have built comb, and that is a really good thing to see on the queen cage. Here's one that's just a little bit smaller. Always a good sign, because what it means is that the worker bees are communicating, queen, we are ready for you, come out and start to lay eggs. Here's some wax comb, here's some cells, excuse me, all ready for you to do that. You have to remove that, however, so that that doesn't get in the way. And the first thing that you do in installing a queen is, if you look at the next slide, you take that queen cage and you staple it to one of the frames. Now, this was when our hives were brand new. There's no comb being built on those frames at all. It's just simply the foundation, that plastic foundation that is dipped in beeswax. So you fasten that face down, and then you can see I'm spraying some sugar water to calm those bees, to keep them busy. And then you have to take the cage and you have to thump it. I have some video that I'd like to share with you showing just that. You want all the bees to be at the bottom of the package, away from the opening, so that you can control where and when they come out. And then the next step is to take that plywood off and shake the bees down into the hive. And that is an absolute thrill when you do that. You figure you're releasing 10,000 bees. Now, you'll notice in this picture, I'm not wearing a veil, I'm not wearing gloves, I just have a sweatshirt on and that's it. And if you look closely, you can see that there are worker bees pretty much all over my sweatshirt. That's because they have nothing to defend, nothing to protect. At this point, they're being shipped with the queen. They have no hive to protect. They have no young to protect. They have no food source to protect. So there is very little incidence of the bees stinging me at this point. And I have to say that I installed those first 2 packages without being stung one time. It still was a bit of a thrill, however. So you shake the bees down into the hive, and they actually want to get around that queen. You'd sometimes have to use your bee brush in order to get those bees down into the hive where they need to belong. And then after 4 or 5 days, you want to release the queen. And I have some video that I'm going to share with you about just how to do that. I actually narrate this video, so we're going to go to the video and watch how the queen actually gets released into the hive. There she goes. And she just went out and down in. Checking her out. She's not down in the hive yet. She's right on the edge of the box, and there she goes, down into the hive. So we're going to let that just sit there for just a couple more minutes. We want the attendant bees to go out also, the ones that were raised with her. It is always very exciting when you release that queen and she goes right down into the hive and gets to work right away. It's very difficult, as I said, to resist going into the hive, but you want to let them get acclimated. Let that queen do her work, start to lay the eggs, and let them alone for a while. If it's a brand new hive that you're installing that bee package in, you're going to have to feed the bees, and they need to use that sugar water, and they're going to convert that into wax. They need to build that foundation out. Wax is the most precious commodity in a beehive. As I said in an earlier show, it takes 7 gallons of nectar to make 1 gallon of honey, but it takes the equivalent of 7 gallons of honey to make 1 gallon of wax. So wax is something that can be used for up to 5 years in a hive. They're always producing new, they're always replenishing it. And generally, you only feed the bees then when you're installing a brand new hive, bees in a brand new hive that doesn't have any wax comb in it, or at the beginning of the season when you want to stimulate brood production, you want to have new worker bees being produced so that they're ready for the nectar flow. And you can feed them other things like a pollen substitute. You can even feed them granulated sugar in the wintertime to supplement their own stores that they have in the hive. And how you feed the bees can be seen in this picture. You use a mason jar. It's a mason jar with some holes punched in the lid, the insert of the lid. And if you look at the next shot, you can see that they get very excited about gathering around those jars that are filled with the sugar water. You can't see it too clearly, but the jars are up on spacers, little wood spacers at the bottom so that the bees can get underneath. As far as maintaining a hive, you do have to check the hive, generally speaking, about once a week to see how things are going. You open the hive up, you use your hive tool to crack the seal on the boxes, you get inside, you lift the frames out and examine the frames. If you look at this frame, you can see this is from our first year as beekeeping. They had started to build the comb out, and before the comb was all the way built out, they began to put pollen in some of the cells at the top center, that's pollen, and they began making honey in the upper left of the frame, and they're preparing to use the cells at the bottom for brood. If you look at the circle on this slide, you can see that it's around the queen, and she is moving onto this frame to begin laying eggs there. I do have a close-up of some bees on some comb, wax comb. This is comb that has already been used. That's why it has a darker color. Once they use the comb for raising brood, it develops into a brown color, as you can see. And the bee in the center of the shot has that pollen in the pollen baskets on her hind legs as she brings that in and gets it ready to store in the hive. The next shot shows examining the different frames. There are little tabs on each frame that you can use to pick them up. The bees don't usually go out there, so it's usually pretty safe to hold the bees there. And the next frame shows that cross section. There is everything that you would want to see in a healthy hive on this frame. At the bottom center, the bottom half, I would say, is all new brood, and that is an excellent brood pattern that queen has established. It's very solid, lots of capped cells. Every one of those capped cells is going to develop into an adult worker bee when it emerges. If you look directly above that, especially on the left side of the frame, left of center, that's all pollen on that frame. Those orange-colored cells are filled with pollen or bee bread that they've mixed with some of the nectar. And then in the upper left and the upper right-hand corners are 2 sections of capped honey that they've made, and they have that right there ready to go to feed the bees. In the next picture, you can see using the bee suit in order to explore what's going on with the hives. I have a little rack that I can use to hold the frames from the hive to take a look at them. And then there's bee yard maintenance. You have to mow the grass. If you look at the next one, we have sheep, and so we let the sheep in there to take care of that most of the time. Actually, bees don't like lawnmowers or string trimmers too much. They make a buzzing sound that irritates the bees, so I can't mow this area unless I'm wearing a veil or the bee suit. And sometimes you'll get some errant comb, as you can see on this picture. For one reason or another, the bees have started building comb off of the hive. It's probably because I didn't have the frames tightly put together. They're going to fill up that space if it's wider than 3/8 of an inch. There's another angle here in this next shot, as you can see. And that has to be removed because that's just not going to be productive. There are two entrances usually for every hive. This is the main entrance. You can see that it's restricted or reduced just a little bit, allowing the bees to go in and out. And then there is usually an upper entrance for the bees to be able to take the nectar directly into those honey supers, which is a great thing, great way for them to go and have direct access to making honey in the top. The next shot shows some drone cells. Those are the bulging cells along the bottom row, not at the very bottom. I'm thinking that those cells might be the beginning of queen cells, not something that you want to see as a beekeeper. If they begin to develop and produce queen cells, that could mean that they're getting ready to swarm, that they feel as though they're overcrowded and they need, that's how a beehive reproduces, to send the queen and about 2/3 of your worker bees out to another location to establish a new colony. So you usually cut those off and you want to provide some empty frames or even another box so that they have plenty of room to expand. If you look at the next frame, the next picture, you can see a honey super being placed on top. And that would be an empty frame of nothing on there at all. You spray that a little bit with sugar water, and that encourages the bees to begin building there. The next frame shows a full frame of honey that has been established by the bees in their brood box. That's honey that they will use for their winter stores. And the next frame shows another shot of a similar frame. You can see that large brown area in the center. That's where they had used those cells originally for producing brood, and now they have that whole frame filled with honey. One of those frames can weigh almost 8 pounds, 5 to 8 pounds. So it's very solid. And the next picture is something that every beekeeper wants to see, and that is a full frame of honey that is ready for us to harvest. And we'll talk a little bit about harvesting in the future, harvesting that honey. I hope to be able to capture some video of us actually doing that and showing you the process for collecting raw filtered honey. I just want to take a minute to talk about bee stings. If you have a beehive, and if you're going to work a beehive, you will get stung. Over the last couple of years, I've probably been stung at least 200 times. And this shows a bee in the process of stinging someone. You can see that that stinger is staying in the person's skin, and as they escape, as they leave, it actually pulls part of their intestinal tract out, and that bee is going to die in a couple of minutes. The next frame shows another shot of a bee stinging and flying away as it literally pulls its guts out, I guess you could say. And then we have a close-up of what a bee stinger looks like. It is barbed. Now, wasps, such as yellow jackets and hornets, have a smooth stinger, so they can sting you multiple times. However, a honeybee can only sting you one time. Not true for the queen. The queen can sting you multiple times. And if you look at the next shot, you can see the part of the bee that often is lost as the bee flies away from you. The key to not getting much of a reaction from a bee sting is to get that stinger out as quickly as possible. And what you usually do is you take your hive tool, the blade of your hive tool, and scrape that, pulling that stinger out. Because on the stinger are actually muscles that continue to pump the venom into your skin, down into your skin. The next shot shows probably the worst reaction that I ever had. A honeybee stung me in a vein or an artery on the back of my hand, and it did balloon up just a little bit. Well, that concludes our show for this time. I want to thank you for joining us. There is so much more that I could share with you, and perhaps we'll create another show at some future date to show you more details about beekeeping. In the meantime, this is Dave Willauer, host of Ram Country, saying make it a great day or not. The choice is yours.